Today, we're taking a look back at one of the most iconic games released for the Super Nintendo, Secret of Mana. Chances are, you've either played or heard of this action RPG, because in many ways it helped pave the way for many future games of the same genre. Developed and published by Square, Secret of Mana was released in 1993 to both Japan and the US. However, the game wasn't released in Europe until the following year. The game received near universal praise at the time of its release, and over the following years was re-released on different platforms, including for both Android and iOS, and also for the Wii and Wii U Virtual Console. Most of us know the game as simply Secret of Mana. However, in Japan, the game was known as Seiken Densetsu 2, which translates to Legend of the Sacred Sword 2. Wait, 2? So Secret of Mana is a sequel to another game? Well, yes it is. Secret of Mana is actually the sequel to Seiken Densetsu for the Game Boy, or as it was known in the US, Final Fantasy Adventure. And if that still doesn't sound familiar, that might be because Seiken Densetsu became known as simply Mystic Quest in Europe and Australia. Despite what some people may first think, Secret of Mana is not actually part of the Final Fantasy series, but it actually serves as the second installment of the Mana series. And yes, since Secret of Mana is the sequel to Final Fantasy Adventure, that means Final Fantasy Adventure is part of the Mana series and not the Final Fantasy series. And it's quite understandable as to why this might confuse some people. We've talked about 2 games in the Mana series, but it doesn't just consist of Final Fantasy Adventure and Secret of Mana. There were actually several new installments added over the following years. It's likely that you won't recognize a few of the installments because they were never released outside of Japan, and actually a few of them were nothing more than games for mobile. We've talked a little history about Secret of Mana, but what makes the game so unique and innovative opposed to other RPGs and action RPGs at the time? There's several things, but we'll start with one of the main features that people remember the game for, and that's the multiplayer. Now, you can certainly play Secret of Mana solo, but one of the coolest features is that a friend can plug in their controller at any time and take control of one of the other 2 main characters not currently being used. By default, the Super Nintendo only supported 2 players playing simultaneously, but if you own the Super Nintendo Super Multitap, you could have up to 3 players playing at the same time. However, for the Wii and Wii U Virtual Console releases, all you need is either 3 GameCube controllers or 3 classic controllers that have 3 people playing simultaneously. Although I feel like the multiplayer is where Secret of Mana really shines, and also eliminates a lot of problems with the game. For the purpose of this video, I'll be focusing on the solo experience. So before we get into gameplay mechanics, let's briefly talk about the game's story. You start out as a young boy from the village of Podos, who against the village elder's warning, is out hunting for treasure with his friends. After falling from a log he was attempting to cross, he accidentally comes across an old sword that is stuck in a stone. The boy removes the sword from the stone, and suddenly monsters are released around his village. Seeing these events as a bad omen, the elder and villagers have no choice but to banish him from Podos. A traveling swordsman the boy meets, who goes by the name of Gemma, realizes this old sword is actually the legendary Mana Sword. He then instructs the boy to visit the 8 Mana Temples to restore the Mana Sword's original power. Early on in its journey, the boy gains 2 new travel companions, a young girl, and also a sprite child. Together, these 3 travel in hopes of restoring the Mana Sword to its original power. They must also try to stop the Empire, who are being manipulated by the evil sorcerer Thanatos, from unsealing the 8 extremely powerful Mana Seeds. Thanatos has been able to manipulate the Empire into attempting to unseal the power of the Mana Seeds by saying he only wishes to create a new peaceful world. Did you notice how I didn't refer to any of the playable characters by name? Well, there's a reason for that. Outside of Japan, these characters didn't officially have names. The player was given the responsibility of coming up with names for them. However, in Japan, these characters were given names. Not in the game, but in the player's manual. The hero was named Rondi, the girl was named Prim, and then the sprite child was named Popoi. But like the US version, the Japanese version allowed the players to name the characters whatever they wanted. Now, let's actually talk about the game mechanics. In terms of stats, health, and magic, Secret of Mana really doesn't deviate too much from the typical RPG format. The leveling system is the same one you've seen plenty of times before. When you kill enemies, you gain experience points. Once you reach a certain amount of experience points, your character will level up, and then your stats will increase accordingly. Your health is gauged numerically on the bottom of the screen as HP. When a character's HP reaches 0, they see the Reaper, which means they die, and they cannot be used again until they're revived at an inn or with an item or magic. Magic works a little bit differently. You still have your magic points, or MP, but your MP is only viewable in the magic subsection of the menu. But this makes sense, because to cast a spell, you have to pause the game and go into the magic submenu. In this menu, you'll be able to access and cast your various types of magic, which is unlocked progressively as the game goes on by rescuing beings called elementals. But we'll talk more about magic soon. Now, onto your various types of armor and accessories. Armor and accessories don't work differently from what you've seen in other RPGs. You buy the better armor or accessory, you equip it, and it improves your stats. It's pretty basic. Weapons, on the other hand, are probably entirely different from what you've seen in other RPGs. You don't buy your weapons in Secret of Mana. Instead, they're unlocked as the story progresses. There are 8 different weapon types in total, and luckily, you'll have them all unlocked fairly early on. But if you can't buy better weapons, then there must be some way to improve the ones you have, right? Well, of course there is. Improving these weapons is done by gaining items which are called weapon orbs. These orbs are usually found in a chest or gained by defeating a boss. Then all you will need to do is take these weapon orbs to a dwarven blacksmith, who can be found all across the world. And for a price, he will upgrade these weapons to the next level, making the weapons stronger and also sometimes gaining additional effects or properties. I'll admit, it can sound a little confusing at first, but it's really quite simple. Let's say you defeated a boss and obtained a whip orb. All you need to do is take this orb to the blacksmith, and for a price he'll upgrade your whip for you to the next level. However, you won't be able to upgrade it again until you gain another orb specific to that weapon. Now I think it's time to actually get to the bread and butter of the game, and by that I mean the combat. If you've played other action RPGs, then you'll have a general idea of how the combat works. You hit the enemies with your weapon or use magic on them until they die. Nothing special there, but this is where things get interesting and probably becomes one of the biggest draws to Secret of Mana. All 3 of your playable characters will be engaging in the fights at the same time. Now once again, keep in mind we're focusing solely on the solo gameplay here, so some of this won't apply if you're playing with more than one person. During your playthrough and during battles, you'll be switching control between your 3 playable characters. While you're controlling one character, the other 2 will attack enemies based on how you have them set up in the action grid. Now a forewarning, the action grid can be a bit confusing at first, and I honestly still haven't figured out how to use it completely, but it's essential for you to know the basics, because it's going to determine how your character's AI behaves in battle. You access the grid from the character menu. When you first open the grid, you'll notice there's 4 directions displayed on each side of the grid. Approach, attack, guard, and keep away. Depending on where you place the character on the grid, this will determine what your AI character does when it spots an enemy. A character's default position on this grid is on the bottom right hand corner. However, I find leaving the character here makes the AI way too timid, and typically they will only attack if an enemy is right on top of the player controlled character. But on the other side of things, if you set the character too high up on the grid, they tend to act like Rambo and run in and get themselves killed off quickly. I found the best strategy to use in almost every situation is to simply set the character on the bottom left portion of the grid and then equip them with a longer range weapon. This ensures they typically keep their distance from an enemy, but will still attack them aggressively. I really do wish I could give more information on the action grid, but unfortunately I found placing them anywhere else but the bottom left was just a recipe for disaster. With that being said, let's go ahead and turn our attention to the magic system. I really don't think I need to talk too much about how magic is actually used in the game, because it's the same system you've seen in plenty of other RPGs. You select a spell from the menu, then you select your target, whether it be an ally or an enemy, and then you just let the magic happen. As I stated earlier, your various types of magic are unlocked by rescuing creatures called elementals. Each elemental will grant your character 3 new spells that can be used that are exclusive to that character, with the exception being the hero who can't use magic at all. The elementals will grant the girl support magic. Doing so allows her to heal and buff other players, whereas the elementals will give the sprite child more damaging attack magic. Be warned though, the sprite child can end up becoming seriously overpowered. He has the potential to deal out some serious damage due to a glitch that allows him to cast his magic endlessly until he runs out of MP. And I'm not proud to say I took advantage of this. The last thing to cover with magic is how you level up your spells, and it's actually quite simple, you just use them. The more you use a spell, the faster that elemental will level up, thus making your spells stronger. On the other side of things, the details of how melee combat works is actually pretty unique. You will see that below a character's displayed HP, a percentage counter will appear after you perform a melee attack. Unless the player lets this counter refill to 100% before attacking again, they're going to do minimal damage to their target. It can take a little bit of getting used to before you stop trying to attack a target over and over again without letting the meter refill, but the whole system does work pretty well. But there is also another very important aspect of melee attacks, and that is the character's weapon level. The more a character uses a weapon, the more proficient they'll become with that weapon. This comes into play with what are known as charge attacks. Depending on a character's skill level with a certain weapon, they can save up energy for a charge attack after performing a basic attack. To do a charge attack, all the player needs to do is hold in the attack button after performing a basic attack, and then their weapon will begin charging energy. So let's say the hero has a level 3 weapon skill with the sword. After he performs a basic attack, he can charge up his weapon to potentially level 3 and then release a much more powerful attack than his regular basic attacks. How high a player can charge their weapon correlates directly with their weapon levels. The AI-controlled characters can also be set to use a charge attack by selecting what charge you would like them to use in the action grid. There can be some cons to using a charge attack, however. The main factor in using this type of attack is the amount of time it takes to charge your attack. It can feel like an eternity in a high-stress situation. And this stress can be compounded by the fact that a character will move much more slowly while charging an attack. However, it does make you put a lot more thought into each battle scenario, and whether or not it's worth actually charging your attack for a little extra damage. Sometimes it's better just to rely on the weaker but faster basic attacks. But now on to the big question. How has Secret of Mana held up over the years? And the answer is, honestly, not well. This is mainly due to the frustratingly bad AI. Of course, at the time of the game's release, this sort of artificial intelligence had not really been used a lot, so it was actually quite good, but by today's standards, not so much. Oftentimes, I would find one of my AI-controlled characters getting stuck behind a wall or a staircase, and then I would actually have to go back and get them. What makes this especially frustrating is the fact that you can't proceed further until you get the character unstuck. This is because all the characters must stay on the same screen. However, this doesn't apply if you're able to get into a new loading area, then the character will be unstuck whenever the new area loads. Also, the AI characters have a bad habit of trying to attack an enemy only to miss them ever so slightly. And instead of the character repositioning itself to make the attack hit, it would often just stand in the same place and spam the attack, missing every time, until I forced them to take a different position where they could actually hit. But the bad AI isn't the only problem in Secret of Mana. There are also some very annoying and at times game-breaking glitches. The main glitch I encountered, and it did happen several times, was when an AI character would somehow get through a wall or end up on a ledge they weren't supposed to be able to get to. This becomes problematic because, as I said earlier, all characters must travel together, and if one ends up where the others can't get to, the only option is to reset the game if there is no other way out. Another glitch I encountered is what is known as the Snowman Abduction glitch. Yes, the name is funny, but I assure you the consequences of this glitch happening are not. What happens is your character obtains a status effect known as Frosty. This turns them into a snowman. Then they have the potential of disappearing. When this happened in my playthrough, the girl was turned into a snowman and then just suddenly she was gone. I thought maybe she went back to the inn to rest or something and this was some kind of scripted event, but no, if you save after this happens, you'll not have the girl again for the entire game. From the research I did on this glitch, it seems like this glitch can happen to any character. And although it is possible to continue the game with a missing character, you can imagine the devastating effects it can have. Lucky for me, this wasn't the first glitch I experienced in the game, and this seemed kind of weird to me, so I looked it up, and I never actually saved after I lost the girl. And I'm sure there's plenty of players out there who thought this was just some kind of scripted event, and ended up saving their game, only to find out they can't get their lost character back. And finally, there was one more glitch that happened to me twice. Both times were during a boss fight, and as I killed the boss, I was attempting to heal my characters, and then the game just wouldn't proceed after the boss fight. The game wasn't frozen, but the dialogue never continued, and I was stuck and had to reset the game. But that's enough about glitches. Let's talk about a few things I actually did not like about the game itself. One thing was the difficulty. Not that it was too hard, but the difficulty spiked up and down at random. Sometimes I would be in a dungeon, and I would die over and over again. Not level up, but go to the next dungeon and be able to wipe it clean. Luckily though, this seemed to only be a problem in the first half of the game. The second half of the game was pretty consistent in the difficulty level. I do have one complaint about the multiplayer, and that's the fact that the game will pause anytime one player wants to access the menu or cast a spell. It would have been nice to see a mini wheel pop above the player's head for them to be able to use items or spells, but this is a small complaint. And this is my very last complaint, I swear. But I hate all the stuns, knockdowns, transmogrifies, whatever in this game. Nothing is more frustrating than getting stuck in a barrage of enemy attacks and not being able to move away because you're constantly being knocked down or blown up or turned into something or whatever over and over until you're dead. It is so beyond annoyingly frustrating. Okay, that's enough complaints. And I really want to put emphasis on this next part because I know I've been critical of the game in the last few minutes. And despite that, Secret of Mana is still a really fun and enjoyable game. And the only time I could honestly say I wasn't having fun is when something game-breaking would happen and I would have to reset to my last save point. But other than that, I enjoyed the combat. I enjoyed exploring the dungeons and palaces. I really enjoyed the boss fights, even though I thought a few of them could be unfair at times. But that doesn't change the fact I enjoyed the game from beginning to end. Secret of Mana became one of the most iconic Super Nintendo games for a reason. And that still hasn't changed after all these years. If you're someone who still hasn't played Secret of Mana, or you haven't played it in a long time, and you can look past a few quirky things in the game, I guarantee you'll be having as much fun as I did in no time, especially if you have some friends to join in with you. This has been a look back at Secret of Mana for the Super Nintendo.